In the autumn of 1666, the bells of a London church melted in their own tower. The metal ran down into the stone and set there. The fire is remembered. The famous men who redrew the city afterwards are remembered too. But the men who raised those walls again, stone by heavy stone, with the dust ground white into their sleeves, those men nobody troubled to write down. There was a place waiting for them at the end of each day, an alleyway off Fleet Street, narrow and dark, a door at the end of it, and a tavern said to have been built for the men who rebuilt London by hand. The Old Bell. There now. The latch is caught behind you, and the rain can do its worst against the glass for all the good it will do it. You're dripping, but no matter. Hang that coat where the fire can get at it, and let the wool steam a while. There's ale here, warm enough to put the colour back in a man's face, and a stool that no one will be claiming before you. Good. Sit. You'll have noticed, coming in, the way the smoke gathers up in the beams above us. It has done that for longer than either of us has drawn breath. Places like this keep their own time. And here is a thing worth knowing, while the fire settles itself. The taverns we remember best are not always the ones where kings drank, or where great men set their names to paper. Some of them we remember because of the working men, the ones with dust on their sleeves and a long day in their backs, the ones whose names nobody troubled to write down. I have one such place in mind tonight, a pub off Fleet Street in London. The Old Bell they call it, but to understand why it ever stood, you have to understand what the city had just come through. So let me take you back away. Picture Fleet Street as it was, a street of ink even then. Around the year 1500, a printer by the name of Wynkyn de Worde carried his press there, near the churchyard of St. Bride's, and the trade took root in that soil and never once let go. St. Bride's was an old parish church, older than the printing, older than most things thereabouts, and the people of that parish lived and married and were buried in its shadow. Then came the years that hollowed it out. In 1665, the plague came to St. Bride's, as it came to the whole of London. The vicar then was a man named Richard Pearson, and he did the thing that takes a quiet sort of courage. He stayed. He kept his post while others took to the roads. The records tell us that in the September of that year, 636 of his parishioners were carried to the ground. On a single day, 43 of them. I'll say no more of it than that. You can sit with those numbers a moment. The street did not need describing. The silence in it described itself. By the August of the year that followed, a new vicar had come to a parish still grieving. Paul Boston, his name was. He can have had but a few weeks to learn the faces of his flock. For on the 2nd of September 1666, a fire began in a baker's premises down Pudding Lane. Thomas Farriner was the baker's name. A small thing at first, the sort of thing a city shrugs off before its breakfast. But the wind took it, and the timber took it, and by the 4th of September the flames had crossed the Fleet and reached the very street we have been speaking of. St. Bride's did not survive it. The records remember the glass of its windows warped out of all shape, and the metal of its bells run molten into the stone. 3 days after, on the 7th, 2 men walked through what was left of it. Samuel Pepys and John Evelyn, both diarists, both careful with what they put down. Evelyn wrote of ground still so hot that it burned the soles clean off his shoes as he picked his way across. And so there it stood, a churchyard heavy with the lately dead, and above it a church that was no longer a church at all, only the burned bones of one. A parish already emptied by plague, asked now to find the strength and the coin to raise stone again. How does a place begin again from that? That is where we go next. But take a drink first. You'll want it. Now. You'd think a parish in that state might have lain down and let the grass take it. Many a place did. But Paul Boston, that new vicar with the few weeks' acquaintance of his flock, would not have it. He would not let the parish simply vanish from the map of the city, the way so many were quietly doing. So they raised a tabernacle, a rough thing of timber thrown up there in the ruined churchyard among the blackened stones and the graves. No spire to it, no glass, no grandeur. Just walls and a roof and somewhere for the living to gather while they argued over the dead. And gather they did. Boston kept the worship going in that wooden box, Sunday after Sunday, while the parish set about the harder labour, which was this: convincing the men with the purse strings that St. Bride's was worth raising at all. For here is the part they do new put on the brass plaques. The great Sir Christopher Wren, whose name now hangs over the whole rebuilding of London like a banner, was of a mind that the city had too many churches. After the fire, he reckoned fewer would serve, and a parish hollowed out by plague and burned to its foundations was not, on paper, the strongest case for the stonemason's bill. So the churchwardens of St. Bride's did what sensible men have always done when they want something from a person of importance. They took him to dinner. The year was 1671. They sat Wren down at the Old Bell Tavern, and they fed him well. The records are precise about it, as records of money tend to be. The dinner cost £12, 17 shillings, a considerable sum for a parish that had so little. But you do not court a man like Wren on bread and small beer. It worked, or something worked. The parish was told it must find a deposit of £500 before the first stone could be cut. £500 from a congregation only lately decimated, with half its houses still ash. They raised it in a single month. I will let you sit with that as well. There is more devotion in that figure than in any sermon Boston ever preached. And so the rebuilding began. Now, Wren gets the credit, and in fairness, the grand design was his. He was the architect, the overseer, the name on the whole great scheme of the city's churches. But a design on paper does not lift a wall. The man who built St. Bride's, the man whose hands were actually in it, was one Joshua Marshall, master mason to the king, no less, and a local man besides, with his yard not far off in Fetter Lane. It was Marshall and his men who did the true labour. They worked in Portland stone. You'll know it if you've seen it. The pale grey-white stone they ship up from the Dorset coast, heavy enough to bend a man's day around it. Every block of it had to come by sea and up the Thames, then hauled and dressed and lifted by hand, and it leaves its mark on a man. White dust, in the creases of the knuckles, in the hair, ground into the weave of a coat so it never quite washes out. The masons who raised St. Bride's wore that dust like a second skin. The records keep their wages, but not their names. They are the men this story is really about. By the September of 1672, the walls had climbed to the upper cornice. By 1674, the main part of the structure stood finished. The whole of it came in, when the last farthing was counted, at £11,430, 5 shillings and 11 pence. Down to the penny. Always down to the penny, with churchwardens. And here, at last, is where our pub steps out of the smoke. Tradition says, and it is a strong tradition, repeated by St Bride's own history and by the pub's own telling, that the workmen had a hostel hard beside the church, the Old Bell Tavern, built for them by Wren himself, for the use of his masons. Now, I'll be honest with you, as a fireside man should be, no surviving account proves cleanly that Wren sat down and drew the tavern with his own pen. That part is tradition, not ledger. But the story has clung to the place for centuries, and you can see why. A man does not raise a church without somewhere for his workers to go when the light fails. And the Old Bell sat right there, an alleyway's length off Fleet Street, narrow and shadowed, the natural refuge for any man coming off the scaffold. Picture them filing in of an evening, the stone dust still pale on their sleeves, hands cold from the chisel, warming slow around a tankard. The smoke gathering in the beams, the way it gathers above us now. No grandeur to it, no monument, just a roof and ale, and other men who knew exactly how the day had used them. That is the thing to hold on to. The great churches of London were raised in the open, in public, for all the city to admire. But the men who raised them vanished when the day was done into the dark little places like the Old Bell, and the city kept the spire. It did not keep them. The church opened its doors again on a Sunday, the 19th of December 1675. Open mind, not finished. The body of it stood, the worship could begin again, but the tower was still wanting. That famous steeple, the tall tiered thing that draws the eye over Fleet Street to this day, came later, much later. They raised it between 1701 and 1703, near 30 years after the walls. Now, you may hear it said that a young Nicholas Hawksmoor had a hand in the rebuilding. Set that one gently aside. When the walls of St Bride's went up in the 1670s, Hawksmoor was a child. His connection to the place is real enough, but it belongs to that later steeple, not to Marshall's masons. And if anyone tells you the tiered wedding cake was first dreamed up from that spire, well, that is a charming bit of local telling, and I'll leave it as that. A nice story for a nice occasion. Not a thing I'd swear to by this fire. The masons, in their time, drifted away. There is always another wall, another city, another wage somewhere. They took their pale dust and went, and the world that grew up around the Old Bell after them was a different world entirely. It smelled of ink, not stone. But the tables did not change as quickly as the trade did. That is the thing about taverns. They keep the shape of men long after the men themselves have gone. One year, a bench might hold a mason with Portland dust, whitening the seams of his coat. A generation later, that same warm place might hold a printer with blackened fingers, a folded proof in his pocket, and the day's argument still sharp in his mouth. The dust changed colour. The thirst did not. The old talk of scaffolds and stone gave way to paper, presses, libel, deadlines, and who had heard what from whom. But the need was much the same. A working man came in from noise, cold, and pressure, put his hand round a cup, and let the room take some of the day from him. For Fleet Street was becoming what Winkinderwood had planted the seed of 2 centuries before. A street of printers, of pamphlets and broadsheets, type and presses, the scratch and clatter of the trade, and the deadlines that go with it. And where there are men working against the clock, there are taverns waiting for them after. In the March of 1702, a printer named Elizabeth Mallet put out the first number of the Daily Courant. Britain's first daily newspaper, that was. A single sheet, no more. News on the one side, advertisements on the other, and done. She set her name to it as E. Mallet, which tells you something of how a woman had to walk in that trade. Now mind, her press was not the Old Bell, whatever you may read. It stood over near the King's Arms, by Fleet Bridge. I'll not have that detail muddled, even for a good tale. But St. Bride's, in time, became the journalist's church, and the Old Bell became one of their houses, where the printers and the hacks and the inkies came off their shift the way the masons once had, dust of a different kind on their hands, and warmed themselves the same way men always have. The building you'd see today, were you to walk down Fleet Street and find it, wears all of that on it in layers, but here's the honest shape of it. The front you'd see from the street is Victorian. They rebuilt it in 1897, and a handsome thing it is, but it is not old, whatever a fanciful guide might tell you. The true survival is round the back, facing St. Bride's Avenue, where the older bones still hold the plain proportions of the late 17th century. The mason's Old Bell is there, just not where the crowds look for it, and that traveller is the whole of it, or near enough the whole of it, as much as any old London wall will give up willingly, because places like that never hand you their history clean. They offer it in layers. A Victorian frontage where the street expects age, an older rear wall facing the churchyard, quieter and easier to miss, a spire everyone photographs, a tavern door most people pass without thinking, and underneath it all, the same old bargain London has always made with memory. The famous names rise, the working names sink. Wren has his churches, Marshall has his accounts. The churchwardens have their careful figures, written down to the last shilling. But the men who hauled the stone, who came in with dust in their cuffs and grit beneath their nails, they pass through the record like smoke through these beams. You can see where they must have been. You can feel the shape of their days, but reach for their names, and your hand closes on air. So raise what's left in your glass before the fire burns low. To Richard Pearson, who stayed. To Paul Boston, who would not let the parish die. To Wren for the grand design. And to Joshua Marshall, who actually built the thing. To the churchwardens who bought a dinner and raised £500 in a month. To the printers and the inkies who came after. And most of all, to the men with no names in the ledger. The men with the white dust ground into their sleeves, who raised the church and then walked off into the dark to a place much like this one. London remembers Wren's Spire. The pub remembers the men with dust on their coats. And if you ever pass that narrow turning off Fleet Street, with the church rising white above you, and the old tavern door warm beside the shadows, spare a thought for them. Not the men whose names are carved into history, but the ones who lifted it, stone by stone, and then went inside to warm their hands. You've been listening to British Pub Lore. Mind how you go.